wonder why teachers during their classes consider that students are such as empty boxes that you need to fill during the class. That one is a question that we need to solve during this presentation. And the idea is try to answer the question, should education nowadays be based on the concept proposed by Steven Pinker in his book, The Blank Slate, The Denial of the Human Nature. This one is important because we are involved into the educational context and we need to clarify the doubts that we have nowadays. But before answering the question, it's important to give you a general context of this theory of the blank slate that is different to the idea of Pinker's about the blank slate. So take that into account, and we need to come back to the 17th century where the theory was created by John Locke, and he called the theory the blank slate, or in Latin, the tabula rasa. This one is important because years later was boosted by the idea of the noble savage from Rousseau and the idea of the ghost in the machine from Descartes. So why is this one important? Because the blank slate consider that human beings are like empty boxes, and they need to be filled with experiences. So the main focus of this theory are experiences, and that one is an issue nowadays because you say, okay, no, it was created many centuries ago, but the issue is that that one permeates the reality that we are having right now. And that one is a big issue because we need to try to change that perspective because that one influences in the political, in the ethical, and in the educational beliefs. Yes, and you consider that the issues that the students have are not because innate conditions that they have, but they are because they have different experiences. So in that way and in that sense, you are blaming all the time external factors, and that one is a problematic nowadays because we as teachers are like stand in the educational field, and we need to consider the things in a academic and neutral way, but that one is not possible nowadays because we are playing all the time with the moral assumption, with the moral correctness that the society is promoting all the time. For that reason, I do consider that education should be based on the concept that was proposed by Mr. Pinker because it will change the perception that teachers, students, and other agents have in the educational field, and besides, it will configure and modify the practices that teachers are carrying out into the classroom in a different way. So that one is what we are going to see during this presentation. I have just told you that this first view, this first idea is important because if we base and build education since the proposal of Mr. Pinker, we will have a challenging impact on how teachers, students, and other educational agents act and perceive education. And this one is one of the main points of this argument because, as Pinker mentioned in his book, education was perceived many centuries ago as like the basis of the society, and consequently the education received like the obligation, like the not the obligation, but they received the mandatory compulsory to give education to all the students around the world. So you say, okay, that one is not the issue. The issue is that education adopted since the first moment the perspective of the blank slate proposed by Locke, Rousseau, and they promoted students that were different not by the innate human natural features that they have, by different by the experience that they have in their context. So this one is problematic. You know why? Because as Pinker mentioned, Hobbes and Rousseau were fighting years ago to impose one proposal. Yes, Rousseau with the novel Savage, and Hobbes with the Leviathan. So this one was an issue because depending on the position that you took, you were going to have a specific point of view of the reality, and that one was going to impact in your private life. So this one is important nowadays because if we change our locus of enunciation, we are going to see the education in a different way. We are going to see education with pinker eyes, and that one is a good proposal because, as you can see here in the image, teachers are supposed to be this part of the image, and they need to consider education since an academic point of view. We know that we are involved in the cultural aspects and we are not denying those aspects, but it's important to be in the academic side. For that reason, we try to promote this approach because at the beginning, if you consider that the differences between the students are only the experiences, you are telling that they are equal in all the spheres, and this one is fake. Yes, and we are going to go deeper a little bit in this idea in the second view or the second argument that we have in this presentation. But this one is like the main point of this argument. We need to change the rigid perception that we have in the educational sphere, and for that reason, we have some limitations because we need to fight against the educational ministry and educational policies around the world because nowadays they have this moral perception of accepting all the things that we have in the culture, and this one is problematic because it's leading us to a door where the equality is based only in that we are human beings and we are equal in all the spheres, and this one is wrong, because we have innate capabilities and cognitive abilities that we are going to explain in the second argument. Besides, we have to face like the acquired knowledge that teachers have in the educational context because they have traditional roots, and we need to try to move that a little bit and decolonize, and that one is not as easy because you have the political correctness and that moral issues that you as a person and as a teacher has have in your daily life is problematic because it is like it is like a problem for your perception, and it's going to configure that in a specific way, and you need to remember that you are a teacher and you need to have an academic point of view. And finally, we have here the image of the representation of the moral correctness that is a problem for teachers nowadays because they can talk and they can see how reality is, and this one is problematic nowadays. For that reason, we are proposing this first argument. Finally, we have some challenges, and is that we have a big issue here with this argument because in the educational field, you need to promote the idea of Mr. Pinker without excluding the new movements that are involved in the conception of the equality only because we are human beings. So you need to try to figure it out some way. That one is not that easy, and you need to be talking with your classmates, with other teachers to see how you are going to solve this. And finally, you need to prepare teachers to read the book of Mr. Pinker in a denotative way. They can perceive that in a connotative way because you can perceive the book wherever you want. As teachers, we need to be connected, yes, and we need to be supporting us all the time. So this one is the most important, and now we are going to go to the second view. As I was mentioning you just some minutes ago, this second view is very fruitful for us as a teachers because if we consider the education based and viewed in the proposal of Mr. Pinker about the plan Slate, we are going to recognize the inherent differences among students, and we will change our practices that we are carrying out into the classroom. And this one is very important because we have just taught that students and human beings are not equal. They are only equal in terms of rights. Yeah, and we can't confuse and change this idea. That one is the reality, and that one is what we have in our political systems. That one is what we need to have. Yeah, but in the daily activities we are different. Yeah, and we need to take that into account because our plasticity in our brain, the size of our brain, the quantity of gray matter, and the size of the lobes that we have in our brain. This one is important because that one is going to configure our genetics, and it's going to take the cultural and external influences in our societies in a different way. So for that reason, it's important to bring to our presentation very unloved person in the UPN, because we are going to talk about Paulo Freire. So that is about the critical pedagogy. And why? Because this one is important, as you can see in the image, because we are in some way we are making a critique about the bank approach that Freire tried to deny and change in his proposal. And this one is important because if we change our locus of enunciation and we begin to transform our practices into the classroom, we are going to be closer to the critical approach of Mr. Paulo Freire. Sorry, my dear plant, but that one is going to be the idea. So, for that reason, it's important because changing this perspective of that education and people is not people are not empty boxes. We are going to get closer to this perspective, and we are going to add to the proposal of Mr. Freire the idea of the genes, and that we have like a genetical charge in our bodies, and that one is going to be very important. In the second aspect and in the second phase, we are going to see that this one is important for the theory of the cognitive development that Piaget stated and said many years ago. As you know, we have four stages that are the sensor motor, the pre-operational, the concrete operational, and the formal operational stages that are changing between ages, but that one is not rigid. It could change depending on the external influences of the child and all this stuff. But we have here an important example in the sensorimotor stage that is the age between 0 and 2 years. So this one is important and is an example of the importance of conceiving the education since the idea of Mr. Pinker, because as you know, the baby between 0 and 2 years needs to develop the five sense that he is going to use within his life. So this one is very important, but if we don't know what are these kind of development that the baby needs to acquire, we are going to stop the process. Yes. So perhaps the baby in the future, when he's going to become a teenager, he's going to have problems with his reading, his listening, and if we don't know the theory of Mr. Pinker, we are going to blame all the time external factors, and that is the big issue. And for that reason, we are promoting the approach of Mr. Pinker, because the idea is not to blame people all the time. Yeah, teachers are the blamers of my listening in English. Parents are the blamers of the behavior of the children. No, that one is not the idea. We need to consider that we have like external environmental influences, and that we have innate genes in our bodies that configures our minds in a specific way. So this one is very important. And finally, we have, I think, that this one is the best example of the idea of Mr. Pinker, because Garner is like the example of why Pinker is trying to tell us something that we haven't noticed yet. And if the idea of Pinker is mistaken, as many people could think nowadays, why Mr. Gardner designed the theory of the multiple intelligences? You need to take this into account because you know that we have 9 intelligences, as you can see in the screen. And this one is very important because in that way teachers are going to be able to manage the intelligences that their students have in the classroom, because all the students that don't have the same intelligences. And an example is that you could affect your left frontal lobe, and this one is going to affect your process of reading and speaking, but it doesn't mean that your process of singing is going to be affected. You can code and decode music, you see. So teachers need to be conscious about this process, because in that way you are going to boost the multiple intelligences inside the classroom in a fruitful way. And this one is very important, and it's like the most important evidence in the educational field of Mr. Pinker. This one is like the theory of why it's important to consider the genes and the cognitive process that students have in their minds. So, but we have some issues, yeah. You know that we have some limitations with this idea, because the curricula and the practices of the teachers need to be coherent. Yes, what you have in the curricula, you need to have that in your practices. And sometimes the curricula in our countries don't follow the ideas of changing that perception on only that cultural factors are important in the development of children. So that one is a limitation that we have nowadays. And also the lack of preparation of teachers, because you know that we are not experts in the cognitive and psychological sphere, and we tend to leave apart these issues to give them to experts into the field. So this one is something that we need to begin to acquire in our training process at universities. Besides, we have some challenges, and they are that specific cognitive development in personalized and personal processes are difficult to carry out in the classroom, because you know that teachers sometimes has like 26 students per group, so it's very difficult to try to follow the process of only one child. So we need like more support in our classrooms, as some countries in Europe. And the second challenge is that the involvement of other institutions in the process. That one is a big challenge, because education in all the countries is not only about schools and universities. You need to involve the family and the other institutions like the government and the daily life into this process, because you are not going to change all these schools and universities. You need to begin to involve these institutions, and you need to figure it out in some way. And that one is all the idea of this presentation is trying to emphasize that Pinker's idea need to be considered at the moment of seeing education. Yes, because education nowadays should be based and built seeing the concepts of Mr. Pinker, because as you saw during the presentation, you are going to have some pieces of advantage in the locus of enunciation and in the practices that you are going to carry out into your classrooms with the cognitive development set by Mr. Piaget and the multiple intelligences set by Mr. Garner. So that one is the most important, and we need to be open to try to get these new ideas into the psychogenetical field that are going to improve the education at all. And I know that sometimes we have moral issues, but we need to try to break it down to see how we can do the education nowadays better and more complement with the reality and with the science, that with the evidences that we are having in science, to be less biased in our relationships in the society, because that one is going to be very fruitful for the relationships that we have in the society, the way that we have to solve issues, the violence, racism, sexism, all the issues, because the students are going to perceive the society in a different way, and that one is all. Thank you so much.